Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. Game week 1 is only a few days away now and we are fast approaching the deadline, and I thought what better time than to give you my updated FPL strategy for the 2022-23 season. Basically, how do I plan on trying to win FPL? There have been two other videos on my channel where I focused on building the best Game week 1 squad and also just top tips in general for success in FPL. I'll link both of those at the end as well. So if you are looking for more advice around FPL, if you're new to the game or you just want to update your advice for the new season, there is plenty of content here on my channel. If you are enjoying the content here on the channel, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. We are pushing for 20,000 subscribers before Game week 1. But without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So guys, the first piece of my strategy for the 2022-23 season is all based around how we actually view the season. Now, the new introduction for this season, which is different to any other, is that of course we have the World Cup in the middle of the season. So in between sort of November and December, there's a 6-week period where we're going to have no FPL between game week 16 and game week 17. As a result, what FPL are going to do is they're going to give us unlimited transfers in this period. So after game week 16, before game week 17, we essentially have a wildcard. But do not confuse this with a normal wildcard. You can use that whenever you want. In this situation, you can only use these unlimited transfers between 16 and 17. What that essentially means is, as well as our other two wildcards, which you can play the first one in the first half of the season, the second one in the second half, you also have almost like a fresh, clean slate after game week 17. So I think you can almost view the season as a result in almost like into quarters. So let me try and explain how I'm viewing the season. So we've got our unlimited transfers game week 16 to 17. That means that you can play your first wildcard a lot earlier than potentially you would usually do so. So last season, I think I played my wildcard in game week 16. I kept it as long as possible because you normally only have 2 chances to change your squad entirely, like on a permanent basis. So sometimes holding your first wildcard really late can be very useful because it allows you to hold your second wildcard a bit later as well. This season, because we have those extra transfers around the World Cup, I think you can actually get away with playing your wildcard a lot earlier. And I would say that there are maybe 3 good opportunities to play your first wildcard. So there's that early wildcard around game week 2, game week 3, really attack those first couple of game weeks and then wildcard out, try and get on some of the price rises of some of the players that you think will do well for the coming game weeks. And it's more of like an aggressive strategy. You could even play like a bench boost game week 1, wildcard game week 2. So there are lots of ways you can do that. I think the second one, which would be very popular, is sort of between game week 4 and 6. That would be the sort of second early wildcard, not quite as aggressive, but you still get 4 to 6 weeks out of your first team, and then you wildcard around game week 6. But the one that I like, because I do like to wildcard a little bit later anyway, it just suits my strategy. I'm currently looking at a game week 8 to 9 wildcard. That's because there's an international break between game week 8 and 9, and I think that gives you a good opportunity to tinker. It gives you a good opportunity to respond to any injuries, rotations, COVID, etc. that goes on in the international break. So going into game week 9 with a fresh squad, I think in that way, you're viewing that first quarter as game week 1 to game week 8/9. The reason I like doing this and thinking about it this way is you don't necessarily need to think about how many points a player will score across the season. You'll hear, myself included, a lot of content creators will say, pick this player because they're likely to score above 200 points. That largely doesn't matter unless you're telling me that every wildcard you're still going to keep that player. So realistically, what you should be thinking is, who is going to get you the most points between game week 1 and 4 if you're going to play your wildcard then? Or for me, who's going to get me good points? For example, a goalkeeper is what I'm thinking about here. Do I think Ederson is going to do very well between game week 1 and game week 8? Probably. There are lots of opportunities for clean sheets. Do I want to hold Ederson for the entire season? Probably not. There will be opportunities for double game weeks in the future where I want attacking City players, but you don't need to view it as the entire season. So that's sort of that first quarter. The second quarter is after your first wildcard, but before the unlimited transfers. So say I do wildcard for game week 9, you've then got game week 10 to 16. It's probably a shorter quarter there. But that's all you have to get through until you can then change your squad up again. So a nice little short burst of games. Probably the longest quarter you're going to get is after the World Cup before your second wildcard, unless you deploy a very early second wildcard. But I advise holding on to that second wildcard until the doubles and blanks start. Last season, the doubles and blanks started very early. I don't expect that to be the case this season. That was due to COVID and so much rescheduling. We tend to start to get most of them sort of late 20s, early 30s with respect to game weeks. So let's say a wild card, it's just a rough idea here, around 27, 28. That third quarter will be quite long. So it'll be important with your World Cup unlimited transfers to really try and build a squad that you can keep for the long term. And then that final stretch is going to be after your second wildcard. This is when we tend to play the bench boost, the triple captain, the free hit, etc. So I guess this is about more of a sort of a macro point about the way that you view the season. Don't think that you need to build this squad for the entire season. View the first quarter now. realize that you're going to have a second quarter coming up very soon. And maybe just the first thing you need to think about is when are you roughly thinking of playing your first wildcard? Let me know down below if you've got a good idea. For me, I'm currently eyeing up that international break, but if it's not going very well between sort of game week 4 and 6, due to the unlimited transfers we get, I will not be afraid, like I usually am, to deploy an early wildcard because we have that backup around the World Cup. So strategy point 2 is a bit more of a personal one, and it's just something that I learned based on last season and something that I do want to take into this season a little bit, but I'm also hesitant to try and maybe reinforce this too much and encourage you to follow this strategy with me. And it's don't let the bench boost and free hit dictate your season. Now, I've put on the screen last season what the bench boost and the first free hit got me. Of course, we had 2 free hits, but I'm assuming this season it's just going to be the one unless we have further issues. So the bench boost got me 26 points, which was actually a very good bench boost. I think realistically, anything between 15 and 20 class is good. 26 was a very strong bench boost. And the first free hit gained me around 20 points compared to my average team. But it's very difficult to try and understand if it actually gained me 20 because I dead-ended my team into the free hit, if that makes sense. So free hits, it can be very tricky to actually understand how many points it gained you. Assuming it did gain me around 20, that's 46 points, right? So it's a fair amount of points. But what you need to realize is even if you just played these in random weeks and you didn't plan for them extensively, because I really I structured my entire second half of my season around bench boost and free hit. Like I really sacrificed my teams in certain places and I held a lot of money on the bench and I decided not to make a transfer one week because I was playing the free hit the next week. So it really dictated my entire second half of my season. To only gain 46 points, if you just played a free hit in a random week, you could maybe get 10, 15 points. And if you played your bench boost in any given single game week, your bench tends to get sort of like between 8 and 12 points. So maybe I'm only gaining like 20 points on top of someone that's not planned, played it in a random week. And it just makes me think, am I maybe overthinking these chips and letting these chips too much dictate how I navigate the season? Now, again, as you can see by the second point on the slide here, bench boost and free hit are very effective chips if deployed well, but I'm not sure it's worth sacrificing your team or weakening your team in the surrounding weeks and letting it dictate how you plan the season too much. So I suppose what my strategy is going to be with free hit and bench boost is plan for them. Right, I don't want to be in the situation where I'm like, I'll just play them whenever. I'm still going to plan for them. I'm not going to let it weaken my team, and I'm not going to let it dictate me too much. If I don't see a clear path that's easy to navigate with my current team, I'm not going to let it stress me out and worry me too much and force me to change my team just to build towards a bench boost. I know a lot of people disagree with this because it's about optimizing those chips, and sometimes you could get a bench boost with 40 points if you play it well in a double game week. But I would argue that you could still probably get away with playing a bench boost well in a double without having to weaken your team in the surrounding weeks as well. So let me know what you guys think of this point. For me, it's just about playing the chips as well as possible, but not letting it, like I said, overwhelm my system and my season, and not letting it be the main thing that drives the decisions I make, specifically in the back end of the season. So I guess we'll address this again in sort of mid-season. If we do a mid-season review, we'll maybe have a look at how we plan on attacking the second half of the season. But for now, I've not got any plans for the chips. Probably will be in the second half, and I'm not going to let it dictate my season too much. So strategy point 3 is about limiting 1 week punts and short term, not just 1 week, but maybe like 2 to 3 week punts, especially if you're taking a hit. And this is the way that I view transfers in general, not even just hits. This is the way that I personally view transfers. Again, this is open to disagreement because it's not necessarily true, but what the first thing I would say is getting a player for a haul is obviously an amazing feeling, right? It's the best thing in the world. If you jump on a player for the week that they get a haul and then jump off them afterwards and then they go on to like struggle, you just get them for that 1 week where they do really well. That's the best feeling in FPL, but it's extremely difficult to predict when a player will do very well, especially if they're not a player that consistently does well. So I've got Grealish on the screen, but it could be anyone. Those players that aren't going to get you hauls every week, trying to guess when they will get you the haul, I would say it is a guess. I would say it doesn't matter how good a manager you are. It doesn't matter how good you are at reading underlying statistics. Trying to actually interpret when that haul's going to come is basically trying to predict the future, which we can't do. So I would advise, wherever possible, trying to not time a player perfectly and try and just bring in a player for a stretch. I'm going to bring in Grealish because I think over the next 6 to 8 weeks, I think he has the potential over some of those fixtures to do very well, rather than trying to nail it's going to be in game week 14, because I think that's virtually impossible to do. And the way that I view this is, whilst a free transfer is free and you get a free transfer every week, a transfer, in my opinion, should still be worth 4 points. You should still view that transfer as it has cost me 4 points, because if you use that free transfer and you need to use another, it is going to cost 4 points for that hit. So I still view free transfers as 4 points. And therefore, to bring in a player for the short term, you're going to need the transfer to bring them in and then a transfer to take them out as well. So I view it as, if you're not bringing in a player for at least sort of 4 to 6 weeks and you're bringing them in for a much shorter term period, It's essentially costing you 8 points to bring that player in and take them out. As a result, are you confident that the player that you're bringing in, say I'm bringing in Grealish for Mahrez, just as an example, am I confident that Grealish is going to outscore Mahrez by more than 8 points? And is that the best use of my transfer? And I think at that stage, that's when you start to realize that maybe these short-term punts aren't potentially worth it unless you're very confident. And as you can see, just as the final point here, double game weeks are an exception to this rule because it might be that you're taking out a player that's got one very tricky fixture and bringing in a player that's got two very nice fixtures. Not only are you upgrading the player, upgrading the fixtures, you're actually getting an additional fixture. So this is the only time when I don't mind 1 week punts and shorter-term punts. But in general, I would try and look at players that you can bring in for a 4 to 6 week period and try and be a little bit more patient with your transfers, not forcing players in and not forcing players out as well, especially when it's for hits. So guys, we just alluded to this in the previous strategy point, but we're going to bring a little bit of psychology into this now. And you guys know I love my psychology. It's not going to be a strategy video without me bringing a bit of it in. And we've gone for the motto here, if in doubt, don't force them out. And what I mean by this is hits and transfers can be very effective, right? But we shouldn't ever be forcing these. So sometimes a hit could be really well. I've taken -20s last season that actually paid off both immediately and in the long term as well. So I'm all for hits if they're timed well. I'm all for using transfers. Of course, you need to use transfers throughout the season. But I feel like sometimes as managers, we feel like we need to be doing something. We look at our team, and even if there's nothing to do with our team, we feel like we really should. And this is actually a psychological bias. So it's not just an FPL. It's a psychological bias called the action bias. And this is the tendency to believe that we should be doing something rather than just sitting there doing nothing. It's this natural inclination to prefer action over inaction. So this action bias makes us feel like we've got to do something. I look at my team, and even if it's fine, I feel like I need to make a transfer. I feel like I need to switch up the captaincy or change the bench order. We feel almost uncomfortable as managers rolling a transfer and going into the new week. We feel like we're missing out on something that other managers might have spotted. And I genuinely do believe, and I'm not saying I'm the best manager in the world, I only finished 35k last season, but I often believe that the most useful thing to do with your FPL team can be nothing. And if I'm observing some of the top managers over on Twitter and YouTube and all of these top managers that consistently finish well, they often do nothing with their teams. They're often rolling transfers. They're often keeping the same lineup a few weeks in a row because being patient with some of these players, if I've brought in, we'll go back to Grealish on the last slide, whoever it may be, a player with a high upside, I bring them in for 1 week and maybe they're benched or they don't do well. A sort of knee-jerky manager, an inexperienced manager might transfer them out straight away because they feel like they've got to do something with their team and they feel like if that player hasn't done well immediately, then they're not a great option. But the best managers will realize sometimes you just need to let your team sit. And I guarantee if you've played FPL before, if this isn't your first season, you'll realize in previous weeks, sometimes you've got exactly the same team. 1 week, that team will score you like 34 points. You'll get a massive red arrow. You'll do nothing with that team. And then the next week, that team can score you like 95 points with even trickier fixtures. That is the nature of FPL. Right, these are footballers. It's a real life game that we're trying to predict the future of. It's impossible to do. And sometimes just sitting with your team, making no transfers, rolling a transfer, especially earlier on in the season, getting an extra week of information can be absolutely vital. So realize that it is a psychological bias, action bias. Try not to force players out. Try not to force yourself to make transfers and to take hits. And sometimes realize that the most useful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. So we spoke about hits quite a lot last season because I did take quite a few hits over the period of the double game weeks, which worked quite well for me, to be honest. And I spoke about them a little bit in this video. I thought what would be good to do is to try and get some sort of mantra in place or some kind of rule in place so that when I'm taking a hit, I can refer back to it and think, is this a useful time to hit? Because I genuinely do believe hits are not inherently bad and they're not inherently good. You can't say that taking lots of hits is a bad thing in FPL, and I equally don't think you can say that not taking hits is a good thing. I think it really depends on the context. It depends on what kind of manager you are, and it, like I said, the game week, the play you're bringing in. So what is useful, though, is to try and be as careful as possible when taking hits. I do always think that you should question it. Do I need to take this hit? And it can be difficult to try and decide that. So what I've got here is I've just got 4 sort of statements that I'm going to go through when I decide if I want to take a hit or not. I can read through this. It's not an exhaustive list of statements. There will be other pieces of context, such as, is it a double game week? Are there double game weeks upcoming? Is this player going to blank, etc.? But these are 4 things which I think are good to ask yourself when you're deciding whether to take a hit. The first thing is the player that's coming out, that you're transferring out, injured or playing very poorly? If they are, it's probably worth taking the hit for them, especially if they're injured or if they're just playing very poorly over a long period of time, maybe like 3 to 4 weeks, they've just not been performing, then that's probably a good time to take a hit. The second thing is the player coming in a regular starter? Because what you don't want to do is take out a player that's playing poorly but playing 90 minutes and bring in a player that might only start 1 in 3 games. I'm not a massive fan of taking hits for players that you don't know that they're going to start the following game week. So I would try where possible, if you're going to take a hit, try and do it for a regular starter. The third is the player that's coming in someone with a high ceiling? Are you taking a hit for a player that's going to get you 3 or 4 points every single week? Yes, it's nice to have those players that tick along, but a hit's going to cost you 4 points, plus the 2 points of the player you're taking out, right? If you take out a 2-point merchant that's getting you 2 points every week, 4 points for a hit, the player that you're bringing in needs 6 points just to pay back the hit. So if you're bringing in a player that doesn't have that high ceiling of 10 points plus, it's probably not worth taking them out. Bringing them in, I should say, unless they're going to get you more than 6 points, or unless you're confident they could get you more than 6 points. And then the fourth point, are there other issues in your team that maybe you should or that you need to address first? Are there other injuries in your team? Are there other players that you might want to take out or bring in? Rather than this shiny new toy, rather than this hit that maybe you don't need to take, are there other things that you need to do with your team first? And at the end of the day, do you need to take the hit? And I'm not saying that you should only take a hit when you need to, but sometimes you just need to look at your team. Again, going back to the previous slide about the action bias, do you really need to make this transfer? Are you confident that it's going to gain you points? Sometimes you might not need to, but you might think, I've got such an incredibly good feeling that this player is going to get a double-digit haul this week. Go for it. That's what FPL is all about. These calls where no one else is seeing it, no one else is seeing that this player is going to do well. That's what FPL is about, making those calls. But sometimes, due to action bias, due to just wanting to do something with our team, we can be almost force ourselves into taking a hit when sometimes it's not necessary. And sometimes we'll look back at that the week after and go, why on earth did I take that hit? So I am someone that, more than others, is in favor of taking hits at the right time. But I would maybe use a list of statements like this. It doesn't have to be my list. It can be anyone's list. You can make your own. But just try and think to yourself, do I need to take this hit? Is it the best time to take a hit? Are there other transfers I should be making? Use these 4 statements and hopefully you'll come to the correct decision more often than not. So guys, this is something that we spoke about in the season review video. We spoke about in the top tips video released last month. And it's about captaincy. And I just think that captaincy is so important every week. And it frustrates me because I don't think there's a magic formula to it. And this is coming from someone that, not last season I had a few struggles with captaincy. The season before that, I was in like the top 50 managers in the world for captaincy. I didn't have a great season. It was around 100k, but I did very, very well with captaincy. So I'm not saying this because I'm terrible at picking captains and that's why I want it to be changed in FPL, but it frustrates me because it's, again, a call that's almost impossible to predict. Yes, we can pick players like Salah, like Haaland, Kane, etc., that we know will probably do well most weeks, but sometimes I feel like you can be punished ridiculously for a decision that is pretty much a 50-50. I know people don't like us keep referring to it, but last season, there were so many 50-50 calls. Havertz against Norwich, Salah against United. Yes, Salah's the better asset, but I don't think we should have been punished to the extent that we were for captaining Kai Havertz as playing as the number 9 against Norwich when Chelsea won 7-0 over Salah against Manchester United, where no Liverpool player had scored more than 3 goals or 3 goals or more in something like, it was like 30 years. So I don't think that was a decision that should have been punished so heavily. And it does frustrate me that captaincy does have the ability to punish you so heavily. And as a result, I just think that I'm going to try and do a few things that reduce the potential for me to be punished. And this is the part of the game which I don't like about FPL. There are things, I mean, I love the game. I love creating content, but having to play safe sometimes, I'm not sure I necessarily like that, but I do think the captaincy is one where you don't need to take massive risks every week. So there are just 2 things that I'm going to try and pay attention to for captaincy this season because, like I said, I don't think there's a magic formula necessarily. The first is always make sure you have the best captain available to you each week. This sounds like an obvious point, but sometimes we can be reluctant with our premiums to switch off of them. For example, I've got Kane and Haaland in my latest draft. If I want to switch from Haaland to Kane, because I think Kane's I've got Salah and Haaland. If I want to switch from Haaland to Kane because I think Kane's the best captaincy for a single game week, I shouldn't be scared to do so because captaincy, you're not only getting the players' points, you're getting it double. And we saw last season there were points when I didn't switch to Son because I was happy with my premiums. But Son over I think it was over the space of 2 weeks, he got like a 42-pointer and a 38-pointer. So in 2 weeks, Son got 80 points as your captain. Because I didn't even switch to Son, I lost out on all of those points. And it was purely because I didn't want to switch off of my premiums. So I think I'm going to be slightly more willing this season to switch my premiums around a little bit if I genuinely do believe it's going to get me the better captaincy. And it does mean that for game week 1, try and work out if you think that Kane/Son, a Spurs player, is going to be the best captaincy option for one of the opening 6 game weeks, and you don't think that maybe Salah or a City asset are going to be a fantastic captaincy option, choose the premiums that you think will be the best captaincy options, because that's where the value lies with the premium options. So always try and make sure you got the best captain. Don't be afraid to transfer your premiums out to get the better captaincy option for that week. And then the final thing is, and this is the frustrating bit for me, but I genuinely do think it's something which I'm going to try and do a little bit more, is don't back against the obvious captain unless you are confident. I don't mean necessarily obvious with respect to ownership. I'm not saying that you should pay, but if there's, you know, in a week where Salah's got a reasonably easy fixture, but maybe someone like, I don't know, a Man City, rotation risk Man City asset has a slightly easier fixture, maybe that's not the perfect time to back against the obvious Salah captain. And again, I'm not referring to ownership. I'm referring to in your heart, you know, some weeks, there are weeks where you just go, there's probably a straightforward captaincy option this week. But if you are confident, if you genuinely, truly believe that the slightly more differential option, the slightly riskier option is the best captaincy option that week, then absolutely go for it, because that is where you can really shoot up the ranks. But what I've said here is there are other ways to beat the crowd, because if you back against the obvious captain, the likelihood is they are quite highly owned. You can really suffer with your rank as a result. Whereas if you just go for a differential option in a slot where a lot of other people might have a differential option anyway, maybe at some point in the season, like a slightly cheaper forward, you still have the potential to gain like 15, 20 points from that player. But you don't have that same ability to lose points because you're not backing against a really highly owned asset specifically for captaincy. So again, a bit frustrating because I don't like playing like this, but for me, it's something, it's not worth destroying my season, specifically early on in the season, the first half of the season. It's not worth destroying it for me. So I'm going to try and make sure I've always got the best captaincy option. And unless I'm very confident in a slightly more differential option or a slightly riskier option, I'm probably going to play it slightly safer with captaincy and look to try and beat the crowd with some more differential just transfers and options in my team. Let me know down below if you agree with this or if this is not the way you want to play. I don't disagree with either. If you tell me that it's not the way I want to play, I'm just going to captain differentials every week. As long as you're having fun and you're enjoying FPL, who really cares? But for me, I do want to get the best rank that I possibly can, both for the content and also for myself. And as a result, I'm going to play slightly safe with captaincy this season. So guys, there you have it. That is how I'm almost definitely going to win FPL, but really this is how I'm going to try and get the best possible rank. These are a few of the things that I'm thinking with my macro and micro strategy and the way that I'm going to approach the season. Please let me know down below what your strategy looks like. Are there any top tips that you would give or any things that you're trying to follow specifically? Like I said, there will be linked at the end of the video my other two videos around building the best Game Week 1 squad and also just top tips in FPL for success. Hopefully those will help you to get your best possible season as well. If you have been enjoying the preseason content and you're excited for the in-season content as well, please do like, comment and subscribe, and check out all of the other preseason videos that I've done. There are absolutely plenty to keep you busy right up till the Game Week 1 deadline. Until next time, guys, thank you for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.